All of us have weaknesses. Weaknesses by virtue of our limitation as human beings. We're finite. Weaknesses by virtue of our limitation as being fallen people. Weaknesses by virtue of bad habits we've formed over the years and being stuck in those habits. And interestingly enough, Paul, writing about his own weaknesses, said he prayed 3 times that God would pull some thorn from him. He's ambiguous as to what the thorn is, and I'm grateful because that means each of us can identify our particular thorns in his ambiguity. But God said to him, no, Paul, frankly, I'm not going to pull all the thorns because I want you to discover that my power is perfected in your weakness and my grace is sufficient for you. So it's in the midst of our weakness we can begin to see we can't make it in this life without him. Our need is desperate and we're dependent upon him. And there's an author, his name's Jerry Sitzer. He's a professor at Wheaton College in Spokane, Washington. And in one of his books, he wrote, "We are most like God in the world when we're most unlike him in relationship with him." I want to say that again. We're most like God in the world when we're most unlike him in relationship with him. Only God is independent. He is self-existent. He is a necessary being. We are dependent creatures. So we go to him unlike him. We go to him in utter dependence on him. Now we can go into the world more like him, independent of the world, so we can be givers rather than takers. We can serve rather than expect others to serve us. I think this is a pretty remarkable thing because it allows us then to see in our weakness, as we come to God with that weakness, we can be more empathetic towards others. And empathy is the closest we'll ever come to an incarnation-like experience. Only God, the Son, is utterly incarnate. But as we enter empathetically into relationships with others, we seek to understand what their experience might be, what they're going through. We're not using them. We're more self-aware, and therefore we can be, in a sense, empathetic as opposed to being self-referential and utilitarian and using others. Picking up on Sitzer's idea a little bit further, if I find in a moment I'm unlovely in my relationships with others, I've been cruel or hard or lack of compassion, in that moment I recognize I have a need. I go to God unlike him in all of my unloveliness, and I receive out of the rich reservoir of his love for me that I can reinsert myself into the world more loving. If I'm impatient, I don't beat myself up. I allow that in that weakness to be an opportunity to run to him. Receiving his patience, I reinsert myself into the world as a more patient person. And I think the threads that make up the fabric of our lives are woven into a whole. All of us have bad things that have happened to us. And if we focus on that bad thing, it won't be long before we'll find our identity in that bad thing. We'll start playing the victim. All of life is about us. And the result of that is we will become narcissistic. We will begin to look at people in a utilitarian way, and it will be destructive to our becoming what we could be becoming in Christ. If I stay focused on that single thread, it's not good. I have to look at it in the whole fabric, which means that God could take the weak moment, the tragic experience, the difficulty, and weaving it into the larger fabric of his purpose. I can begin to say things like Joseph said to his brothers, "You meant evil against me, God meant it for good." And every weakness and every difficulty and every line that's been assigned to me becomes part of that fabric of my discovering my purposes and fulfilling God's work through me in the world.